Okay, so this video is me doing the third nakshatra out of the 27 nakshatras known as Kritika nakshatras. This is me redoing the nakshatra of Kritika because now I got way more in-depth knowledge that I want to share in regards to Kritika that will, make my first one look like a completely different story. So, Kritika nakshatra falls in between 26.40 degrees of Aries all the way to 10 degrees of Taurus. The deity that rules it is the fire god Agni, and the planet that rules and controls this nakshatra is the sun. The symbolism is a knife or blade, a flaming axe, or like essentially any sharp object. There really hasn't been no consistent, theme for the symbolism of this nakshatra. Some people get the flaming axe because Agni is sometimes depicted with a flaming axe in his hand, and then some people just say a blade or a sharp object because of the nature of this nakshatra. But aside from that, the sexual animal of this nakshatra is the goat. It's a female goat. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm gonna be looking at my notes a lot, so forgive me if I'm looking at my phone a lot. But yeah, so let's get into this nakshatra. So in Taittiriya Brahmana, it is stated that, this spiritual text or this astrological text or whatever, in Taittiriya Brahmana, or just in general, it's believed and interpreted that Kritika nakshatra is stated to be the real first nakshatra out of the 27, and not Ashwini, because in this text, I believe Kritika is the first nakshatra out of the 27 nakshatras to be mentioned, or Agni is one of the first deities to be mentioned. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because how is, at least scientifically, how is the creation of the universe and everything, how has that been described? It's been described as a big bang. When there's like a bang or explosion, you think of fire. And this is a sun ruled nakshatra. So you see that fire element, and the deity that rules is Agni. So you see that fire, and it say that we came from like a big bang, at least scientifically. So this nakshatra, from that little glimpse, it sort of shows the initiative of things. It just shows that, fire is just, it just represents initiative. And it is stated that light travels faster than sound, and fire produces its own light. So you just see initiativeness when it comes to Kritika nakshatra because of its association in relation with fire. Agni is someone who's depicted, is stated to be very youthful, very young. And that makes very much sense, because think about it. It's sort of stated that he is born, or he is present wherever there is fire. Now, typically, things that we have set on fire, they don't last that long. Think about a candle. Depending on the type of candle, the candle can be, the candle can last maybe for several days being burnt. But think of the candle as like a baby. If you set your candle on fire and, within maybe a day or two it dies, that's still very young. If you had a kid and it was born and it after 2 days it died, that was a pretty young baby that died. So because fire, we flick our light, we flick our our lighter, or we turn our stove on, fire is born right then and there. And Agni is essentially born wherever fire is. So fire is like eternal. Fire is like very youthful. So therefore, you see one element of people who have prominent planets in Kritika is that they can have a very youthful looking appearance. Fire, in order for it to exist, it must burn something. Think about it, a light bulb. A light bulb burns itself out. Fire, you making a camp or you grilling, it has to burn something for it to exist. It needs air, but it also needs something to consume in order for it to exist. Typically, when you do rituals or stuff, you invoking deities or you're connecting with your ancestors, you might give offerings. You might do it in the presence of a fire. So Agni, I believe he's depicted of like having 7 tongues or 7 heads, so like he can, eat and consume all of the offerings that are given to him. So, what can you take from these people? From that little thing that I told you. For one, you can see that a critical person is have a huge hunger or a drive for something, or these people could just be very great eaters. They just have a great appetite in some way, shape, or form. You could just see that with the Kritika nursing. But yeah, with the Kritika person. Now, another thing for Agni is that he is depicted riding a ram or sheep. One of the two. It's very debatable when I go look up what is his mount. But I'm going to go with ram. And from here on out, the majority of the information that I'm about to get from Kritika Nakshatra is going to come straight from the knowledge that I've learned about rams and goats, because the ram is the animal that Agni travels on, and the goat is the sexual animal associated with this nakshatra. And think about it. Part of this nakshatra starts in Aries. The natural symbol for Aries is the ram. So there's a whole lot of things to associate with that animal when it comes to this nakshatra, but mainly, in my opinion, when it comes to Kritika nakshatra. So apparently it's stated that rams can fight for hours, and they have been known to fight for a whole day. So that's one thing you can see with a Kritika native, Rams can throw themselves at their opponents up to 20 miles per hour, and rams are muscular and lean because all the climbing they do. You can go look up, rams or goats. They're sometimes shown climbing up these very steep hills and stuff. So you gotta have strong legs for all that. So you might see a Kritika person, they might have very strong, well-developed legs, or they might enjoy doing sports and exercises with their legs. And they can be very aggressive, more so on the Aries side versus the Taurus side. And goats, they like to chew, and they like to swallow and spit out their food and eat it again, apparently, so that they can extract more nutrients out of their food or something. And goats have 4 stomachs, and goats like to search for their own food versus being fed food, just like or grass like other animals. They are goats are foragers. They like to go and search for their own food. They just don't consume grass and stuff. So how can you apply that to a Kritika native? A Kritika native person, they can be very picky when it comes to the type of food that they want to eat. They can be very picky because the goat is just not going to take any type of food that you feed him. He wants to go get his own type of food. So Kritika people, they can be very picky when it comes to the type of food that they eat. And because I told you that, a Kritika, and because I told you that a goat, they like to chew their food a lot. They like to chew it up a lot and then spit it up and eat it again so they can really get the nutrients and stuff that they want. They might be very talkative. They might be very combative verbally because of the constant, moving of their jaws, the flapping of their mouth, the constant chewing and the spitting up and chewing and stuff. And they can just be very maybe communicative or have a very aggressive speech, more so in the Aries. The speech might be more so, sweet or whatever in the Taurus side. Another thing with Kritika people is that it's stated that goats are like one of the first animals to be tamed and herded by humans and stuff. One of the first easiest animals to be tamed and stuff. So how can you apply that? How can you apply that to Kritika Nakshatra? You can see that, even though the sexual animal is a goat, and goats are very easy to, lead and control, I, in my opinion, believe for the Kritika person, they will have the desire to instead want to be the shepherd. They will have the desire to want to lead and guide or control and conquer people. Maybe on the Aries side of this nakshatra, these people want to conquer and control and maybe bend people to their will. And then maybe on the Taurus side, they might maybe seduce and charm and mesmerize people and get them to do what they want to to their own will. So it reminds me of the saying, you can catch more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. You know, through more sweet talk and niceness and manners and just sweet actions, you can sort of get farther sometimes, or get the same results, versus balling up your fists and punching your way out of situations sometimes. So you might see that side in the Taurus side. And goats, apparently they become very depressed in solitude. You know, they need to stay around people. They need to be in groups, in herds. So like I said, that just sort of goes back to what I was sort of saying a few moments ago, that you see that these people, they could have the natural subconscious desire to want to bend people and control people to their will. And if they don't have someone to maybe have underneath them to have them follow orders, or if they don't have something to keep them busy, or, you know, they either gotta like be in an executive position, or they gotta be telling someone what to do, or they gotta be sort of controlling someone in some way, shape, or form. They gotta do something like that, or they'll likely be very depressed. They need social interaction. They need to be around people. They just can't be with themselves. It's like a soldier and a war's over, and they've been trained all their life to fight and kill, and now you want to integrate this killing machine into the world, into the society, and they don't know what to do. They don't got nobody to fight. They don't got nobody necessary to fight, so they just feel purposeless, and they just feel down and confused and lost. So these people, they need maybe to be in an executive position and tell someone, you know, what to do. Another funny phenomenon with goats is that there's the misconception that goats faint. You scare them and they just fall out and faint. But apparently scientifically, that is not the case. What happens with goats is that when you startle them, when you scare them, their muscles freeze. Their muscles stiffens and they can't move. So they end up just falling over. But they're very much so still apparently conscious and awake and alive. They're aware of what's going on. But when you startle them, they'll just fall over because their muscles freeze. So how can you apply this trait to the Kritika native? Well, you can probably just naturally see that with a Kritika person is that they just naturally be very tensed. You know? They could just be naturally very tensed, and it probably doesn't take much for their adrenaline to get up and going. Because from what I've researched, to my understanding, you know, if you scare someone, if you startle them, or if their life is in danger, naturally your fight or flight kicks in. Your adrenaline kicks in for you to either run away from the danger or face the danger head on. And this is something dangerous for goats, because when they get scared, when they get spooked, they're immobile. They can't move, so they easy slaughter. They easy picking. So you could translate that over to real people in real life, in the sense that these people, it don't take much for their adrenaline to get boiled up, for their energy to get hyped, for them to get into that fight or flight state. And because they might naturally be in maybe this executive position or this state of aggression or energy, they can just naturally be very tensed and stiff, muscular, stiff people. And another thing about goats, goat meat is apparently one of the healthier meat options to eat in comparison to other red meats. So, you know, a Kritika person, they might be pretty lean, or they might be in pretty decent shape. And if they're not in pretty decent shape, they might instead be maybe a very conscious eater. As I told you, the goats are very picky. So these people might be very conscious and picky of what they eat, and maybe they might be very, you know, health oriented when it comes to the type of food that they choose to consume. Who else mythologically is associated with goats? Who else is associated with goats mythologically? The deity known as Daksha. But Daksha is known as a god of like rituals and stuff. And to my understanding, Hopefully I'm not messing this up, but y'all can look it up. Daksha is like the son of Brahma. And, you know, he is just, you know, sort of fulfilling one of the people, one of his offsprings that is trying to fulfill Brahma's will and, you know, get his kids to just keep reproducing, you know, to populate the earth and whatnot. But anyway, Daksha is known as like this god of like rituals and stuff. And it makes sense. Because what is some stereotypical sacrificial animals that are used if you was, you know, to do some rituals and spells and stuff? It would be, you know, like a goat or a sheep or a pig. These are like sacrificial animals. So on one side, for a Kritika person, you naturally see this love for fire, which is like no shit, right? But they can also just really love doing rituals and stuff. So the great mythological lore of Daksha is the story of the great Yagna. Yagnas is like these fire rituals and stuff. Apparently it goes like this. Daksha, he had a younger daughter named Sati, who I believe was supposed to be maybe like some incarnation or form of Parvati, who is stated to be the wife of Shiva, the god of destruction. And Daksha did not approve of his daughter Sati being married to Shiva. So one day, Daksha, he had this great big yagna, this great big sacrificial, you know, ritual going on. And he invited just about everybody, but he didn't invite his daughter or his son-in-law, Shiva. And Sati, she wanted to go. Shiva said, we shouldn't go because we're not welcome there. But she went anyway and he stayed behind. And when she gets to this ritual, she feels humiliated and disrespected because, you know, her father is disrespecting and talking negatively about her husband, Shiva, in front of everybody. So she goes and kills herself. She goes apparently and jumps into this sacrificial fire, thus killing herself. And Shiva finds out that his wife is dead and he raises hell. He is angry. He goes down there and he essentially, you know, messes up a lot of the gods and deities that was there. He knocks out the teeth of one of the deities. He cuts off the hands of one of the deities. He pokes or removes the eyes of one of the deities. And for Daksha, it's stated that he ripped off Daksha's head and threw his head into the sacrificial fire. But I believe one of the deities, or Vishnu or somebody, they went and, you know, convinced Shiva that this ritual, this fire ritual, whatever, that we started, it must be completed. It must be finished. You need to bring Daksha back. So he replaced Daksha's head with that of a goat. And I think that Daksha, you know, ended up apologizing to Shiva and all that good stuff. So what can we take from that story? For one, you know, you just see that, again, that this love for rituals and fire and sacrifices and stuff. Two, Daksha had a young daughter, his youngest daughter. He didn't approve of his youngest daughter's husband. So for a Kritika person, maybe if they have a younger daughter, their youngest daughter, you know, you might not approve of the person that your youngest daughter dates in or marries, but that can be pretty common with anybody. But that might be a strong theme that you might notice for people who have planets in Kritika. And one thing that we see is that Kritika people, they should probably avoid initiating and starting fights and arguments in the presence of fire. So if you had a cookout or you cooking, you know, you shouldn't really probably start some fight or some argument or whatever, because you see that Daksha, he was involved. He was the head, the leader of this ritual, and his words, they were sharp. They hurt his daughter, and he ended up paying the price. Everybody at the party got messed up, and he ended up getting his head ripped off and getting replaced with the head of a goat. So you can find yourself getting injured or pretty messed up or just very susceptible potentially to fights and injuries, especially because of your words, when you are in the presence of maybe fire. Like I said, when you're in the kitchen cooking, or when you are maybe smoking a cigarette or weed, or maybe if you're, yeah, like I said, at a cookout or something. So be careful to maybe not try to initiate and start a fight in the presence of fire. And it's stated that Daksha had at least 86 kids, which highlights a sexual nature to this nakshatra. And now let's get to another side of this nakshatra. So let's get into the mythological lore that is commonly known with Agni. So Agni, one thing you can see with people with Kritika nakshatra is that they can naturally be very alluring and naturally very charming. Why do I say that? Because fire can be very mesmerizing. Fire can be very mesmerizing, alluring, and charming. It mesmerized cavemen. If you was to sit in front of a fireplace or a bonfire, you stare at it long enough, you might just become mesmerized by it. You might just be mesmerized by the way that the flame in a candle moves. Fire is very mesmerizing. So a Kritika native person, especially if this is their ascendant lord and all that good stuff, they can be very mesmerizing and alluring and charming. And the story goes, one of the great stories about Agni, it goes like this. It's stated that he spied and lusted over the Saptarishis, which means the 7 rishis' wives. You know, they was doing some ritual or whatever, and they called on him, or he was just present at this ritual, because it stated that he's present wherever there's fire. And these 7 sages, I think maybe their wives is present, and in Agni, he found their wives very attractive. He desired them, and I believe there's different variations of this story, so you know, you'll see and read them differently, but essentially I believe he ends up running away. He ends up going into like the forest and going into like nature, because he ends up feeling bad that he had sexual feeling. Okay, as I was saying, Agni was lusting over those 7 wives of those 7 sages, and he ends up retreating into the forest because he ends up feeling bad, I believe, over the desires of having sexual relations with a woman who was married and taken by another man. But little did Agni know, there was a woman who desired him, who wanted to be with him, who liked him. This woman eventually becomes his consort, his wife. And but she wanted to be with him, and he just didn't pay attention to her or notice her, because he was too busy lusting over these women. So what does she do? She ends up finding Agni, and she transforms herself into one of the wives, and they have sex. So yes, ends up transforming himself into one of the wives, and they end up having sex. And she was able to transform into 6 out of the 7 wives, but she was unable to transform into the 7th wife. For whatever reason, she was unable to change her form into that of the 7th wife. So yeah, that's what happens. It stated that she took his sperm and placed it into like this river or something. But what can you take from that story before I go on and give me more like something that's on my camera? But anyway, so what can you take from that story before I move on? You can see that in a Kritika person, they could want to fulfill their partner's sexual desire. You know, because you see that his wife, she ends up transforming into the woman that he wanted to have sex with. So you can see that play out in many different ways for a Kritika person. A Kritika person, you know, they might be interested in an open relationship. They be like, oh, you know, it's stated that Kritika people, this nakshatra can spawn extramarital affairs, or you could attract people who are in marriages, who are in relationships, swingers. You go to a bar, a couple looks at you, they think you cute, they invite you to their house, they invite you to your hotel, y'all have sex, and that be it. Or in another scenario, you can just be you might really desire and date and go after people who are already in relationships. Or in another scenario, you could see this nakshatra be very much associated with sexual scandals, gossip and rumors about, who's sleeping with who got who pregnant, and all these messy, trashy, gossipy stuff. You can see that with Kritika nakshatra because of this little story. So, like I said, you can see that play out in many different varieties, but like I said, you could just be very attractive and very alluring to people who are in marriages, people who are in relationships. You could have a partner who could just be very kinky and sexual. They could want to maybe fulfill your desires. You see someone that you like, they might bring that person over and then y'all have sex. Or they might just do some crazy role playing. Who knows? That's that sexual, kinky side in nature that you would see in a Kritika nakshatra person because of that story. Now, me going further along with this story, makes me have to introduce the deity known as Kartikeya. Because Kartikeya is also associated with this nakshatra. Who the hell is Kartikeya? Kartikeya is known as the commander of the gods, the commander of the devas. He basically and essentially sort of embodies the energy and characteristics of the planet Mars. But even though the specific stated deity for Mars is known as Mangala, I'll get to that. Kartikeya sort of really embodies a lot of the traits of what you would give to, the planet Mars. So Kartikeya is stated to be the child of Shiva. And I believe, apparently due to some curse, like I said, there's many different variations and alterations to this tale, to this story, but it is stated essentially that Shiva was having sexual problems. He was having a hard time ejaculating. He was having a hard time having an orgasm. But the devas, the gods, they needed a child to be born from Shiva so that that child could end up killing this demon known as Taurus, a demon who had the wish granted that only a child who is, only someone who is no more than 7 days old can be him. So someone has to be 7 or younger in order to be him. 7 days old or younger and able to be him. He had that wish granted. So the deities, they wanted to get a kid from Shiva to be born. And he was having a hard time having an orgasm with his wife Parvati, and there was a whole big deal over deities and gods trying to help him climax and shit. But eventually they was able to get this sperm from Shiva, and this is really where the story gets wacky and it's a whole different bunch of interpretations of it. But essentially that sperm of Shiva gets passed around to a whole bunch of different people and stuff. There's one story that states that sperm of Shiva, it gets held onto, it gets sent to Agni. Agni is the one, this fire god. He is stated to be the one to hold and carry the sperm of Shiva, because it's stated that the sperm was very fiery and hot. And Agni, he's a fire god, so, dealing and handling fire should be right up his alley, right? But it was apparently even overwhelming for him to handle. So the fire, and so that sperm, I believe it ended up getting passed to the wind god Vayu, and it ended up getting passed to the earth, and then it ends up getting passed to the water goddess, the Ganges water goddess or whatever. And because it was getting passed around so many different times, eventually, some way, somehow, the kid was born, and it stated that Kartikeya was born with like 6 heads. That's one interpretation. But a more simpler and easier interpretation about how Kartikeya was born, it is stated that Agni was given the sperm. Long story short, he somehow ended up with the sperm of Shiva, but he couldn't handle this. He couldn't handle holding this sperm, and he was still spying and lusting after the wives of those sages. So he ends up plotting and ends up deciding to get those wives pregnant. So some way, somehow, he ends up, it's not really made explicitly clear. You can just sort of interpret yourself, but he ends up getting them pregnant. And whether it's true or not that he got them pregnant, Kartikeya was born. And Kartikeya was born with like 6 heads, it was stated. And the husbands of those 6 wives, because I believe, like I said, Agni's wife wasn't able to transform into that 7th wife for whatever reason. So Agni ends up only getting 6 of those wives pregnant. He ends up getting those wives pregnant, and those husbands, they end up leaving. They end up leaving those wives because it's like, what the hell is this? You ended up cheating on me. So this is where you get that relationship scandal theme. But also, another crazy interpretation, and I'm sorry if I'm confusing y'all because there's so many different interpretations of this. You remember how I told y'all when Agni had sex with his wife and his wife transformed to 6 out of those 7, his wife transformed to 6 out of those 7 wives of the sages, and how I told you that the sperm that he had with each transformation that his wife took, it was placed in a river. So because of those 6 ejaculations was placed in a river, it's also believed that, the sperm that Agni took from Shiva was placed in that river and the kid was born. So that's one interpretation of how the kid was associated with being a child from those 6 wives and why the kid had 6 heads. So you can interpret those 2 ways. You can either interpret it as Agni had sex maybe against the will of those other wives and produced a child of Kartikeya, or you can interpret it as that he simply took the sperm of Shiva and placed it in this pool of his sperm that he had with having sex with his wife after she essentially transformed herself into 6 out of those wives. And because she transformed herself into those wives, that's why, the rumor or the theme just came out that, those wives ended up cheating on their husbands. So you can interpret it either way, but long story short, because of those different variations of how Kartikeya was born, about the process of it being born, you see the theme of adoption, and you see sexual scandals and rumors associated with Kritika nakshatra. And not the sexual animal, the bird that is associated with this nakshatra is a peacock. And what is the theme about? For one, what do we know about peacock? Peacocks are very colorful. They're very attractive. They're eye catchers. So that's one thing you can also stack on top of Kritika, about them being very attractive, about them being very alluring and mesmerizing. And another cool fun fact that I didn't know about peacocks, but it's stated to only be for the male peacocks, is that they can produce a fake copulatory sexual cry in order to attract more women. So it sort of works like this, to my understanding, from what I looked up on the internet. Male peacocks, they can give off essentially like, an orgasmic cry, a sexual moan. And this sexual cry, this sexual moan or whatever, it can attract female peacocks. And it can make those female peacocks want to come over and be attracted to the guy, because they'll think that, he must be wild. He must be very good at having sex. He must be an amazing lover. I want to be with him. So, whether it's true or not, because like I said, the peacocks, they can fake this call. The male peacocks know that the women, they are attracted to this call. It draws them in. So a male peacock, they can fake this moan. They can fake this sexual cry in order to attract other women and have sex with them. So with the peacock being associated with this nakshatra, highlights and amplifies the sexual and attractive nature of Kritika nakshatra even more. What do we know about Krishna, who is the 8th major incarnation of Lord Vishnu? He is depicted having the feather of a peacock in his hair. And I believe maybe he was adopted or something to that nature. Don't entirely quote me on that. But me telling you about all the different people that sort of had a hand to play in Kartikeya's birth with the sperm, me telling you all those different, interpretations and stories about how he was born, you can see a strong theme of adoption. Or you could be bouncing around from foster home or different family homes. Themes of adoption is associated with Kritika nakshatra because of that fact. So that's essentially the major story that I have to talk about with Agni, because he had a role to play when it came to how Agni. That's the major role that Agni had to play in relation to how Kartikeya was born. And Kartikeya, is stated to also be like a subsidiary deity, a sub deity of this nakshatra. He's stated to have a huge impact in this nakshatra. So I told y'all a bit earlier that there's a deity that's associated with Mars known as Mangala, and Kartikeya pretty much, very much so, embodies the traits of Mars. And in my interpretation, I look up Mangala, the deity who is stated to be the deity of Mars, and I can't really find too much information on him on the internet, but I find a plethora, a nice amount of information about Kartikeya. And when you look up their birth, the different versions of their birth is pretty much, very much so similar. So one interpretation of Kartikeya's birth, because I didn't want to confuse y'all, is that one interpretation of Kartikeya's birth is that he came from a sweat drop of Shiva, and it touched the earth, and Kartikeya was born. And that is the same interpretation about how Mangala, the deity of Mars, is stated he was essentially born like that. He came from like the sweat or something. From one interpretation for Mangala, the deity of Mars, that he came from like the sweat of Shiva, and it touched the earth, and he was born. So due to the many different conflicting interpretations of the births of these two deities, they could very much so be the same person. In my opinion, they could very much so be the same person, but they go under different names. And this is why you can sort of see some people, they just really associate the characteristics and traits of Mars with Kartikeya. And it is stated that Kartikeya, he was a celibate, or he wasn't married. Or if you do go look up Kartikeya, you will see some people say, or articles say, that he did have a consort. But it's stated that, his wife, or his consort or whatever, is essentially a personification of his weapons. She's a personification of his army. So it's like he's not, in a sense, really married, but he's instead married to his weapons. He's married to his his army and his love for fighting. And I believe, from what I remember, from what I looked up, there's a temple to worship and honor Kartikeya in India, and it's a temple that only men can enter and not women can enter, because it's stated that he didn't have no wife. And if you was to really interpret that into a practical sense, you could sort of maybe stereotypically think of a guy who is like maybe in the army, and he's always, the government essentially owns you. You're never stable. You're getting shipped to Japan, to Africa, whatever. You're getting shipped all across the world and stuff. It can be sort of hard to really have a wife and stay committed when you're always traveling, when you're always fighting. Your life is sort of short and it's fast, and it can end any moment. So you don't really have time to be weighed down and tied down being a responsible parent figure, stereotypically. Of course, there's great people who can be in the service and be a great parent, but I'm just thinking from that sense and applying it to Kartikeya. And you might see things and themes of that nature with a Kritika person. Like I said, on one side it can be very sexual, but this is a very sharp and aggressive nakshatra, and it's not really a soft nakshatra. It's not one of the most favorable nakshatras for marriage or childbirth, because you see, it was a very difficult birth for Kartikeya to be born. It was very difficult. a lot of things had to happen for him to be born. But let's get back to his purpose of being born, which was him having to slay and kill Kritika, that demon who had the wish that only someone who is no more than 7 days old can kill him. So within 7 days, Kartikeya is educated by the wives of those sages, because after it got out that, you know, that 6 of those wives of the 7 sages had an affair potentially and was responsible for Kartikeya's birth, they was widowed, they was divorced, and it stated that they was initially sent to Kartikeya to poison him and kill that kid. They was stated to initially be told to have, like, put poison on their nipple so that when they breastfeed the kid, he would die. But they didn't do that, and they ended up nurturing and teaching and educating the kid. So you see that motherly, that nurturing and educational side of Kritika. You probably more so see that in the Taurus side, because think about it, these women, they're very educated, they're smart to some extent, because their husband was a great sage. So they educated Kartikeya, and along the line, some way, somehow, he also got skilled in fighting and weaponry, and he was able to fulfill his destiny, and he was able to kill and destroy Kritika, and he eventually goes and flies off to meet his real parent, which is Shiva and his mother Parvati. But because he's known as like the commander of the gods, the leader of their army and all that stuff, like I said, you just see that real sharp, aggressive communication with a Kritika person, or this strong individualistic mindset with a Kritika person, which makes sense because this is sun ruled nakshatra. The sun, everything revolves around the sun. The sun lights and heats up everything. The sun is like the natural planet. It's like a natural planetary body, even though I know it's a star, but it's like a king. So the Kritika person, they naturally carry that sharp, aggressive, commanding, and authoritative energy or communication with them. You'll see more so of that aggression and assertiveness, more so maybe in the Aries side. In the Aries side, you'll probably see more so of the characteristics and traits of Kartikeya, which is being a commander and leader in general of an army. And in the Taurus side, you will probably see more so of the sexual, sensual, lustful nature of Agni. You'll see more so probably of the sexual scandals of the 6 wives of the 7 sages who was accused of cheating and stuff. You will see more so of that sexual, kinky, and maybe motherly, nurturing, adoptive side in the Taurus side, and the Agni in the you know, the Aries side. You'll see more so of that aggressive side, that warrior side, that love for weaponry, that love for fighting. So, you know, you can see people who have prominent planets in Kritika, they could probably have a love for weapons. And these people, they could be very great cooks. They could be very great chefs. Because I told you that the goat is a very picky eater. And the deity of this nakshatra is fire, is Agni. The symbolism is a sharp object. It could be an axe, it could be a weapon, it could be a sword. And so you can see these people just naturally have a love for potentially cooking down the line. It's also stated that Kartikeya, after he defeats and kills Kritika, that he transformed. It's sort of weird the way that I've read it, but it's stated that after he defeated Kritika, he took Kritika's ego and transformed it into a rooster, and he allowed this rooster form of Kritika, the demon, to be spared if he decided to become his mount, his animal, his pet, his companion, his form of transportation. So Kritika, his ego or whatever, agreed that yes, if you spare my life, I will happily be your, you know, your form of transportation. And with that being said, it stated that, you know, he ends up transforming, you know, this rooster or whatever into a peacock. And this is how, you know, Kartikeya's form and vehicle of transportation is a peacock. So one way you can interpret that is that these people, after they defeat their enemies, the people who was initially your enemy, they can end up becoming your friend. They can end up wanting to come back. After you conquered them, after you defeated them, after you slayed them, after you beat and overcome these rumors or scandals or whatever that people throw at you, they can eventually want to become your friend. Like, you know what, you're the best. You won, you beat me. You know, what do you want? You want money? Or you want me to do this for you? They come and be your friend. Almost like a parent who, after they, you know, they yell at you, they try to be your friend afterwards and stuff. And, that is essentially all that I have to say about Krittika nakshatra. I hope that this video gave you a whole lot of great in-depth knowledge and wisdom and clarity in regards to Krittika nakshatra. And if you would like to get consultation and insight on your birth chart, go click the About Me section on my YouTube channel and hit the link. And you know, I got options for you for me to, you know, send you a detailed audio message of me interpreting and explaining your chart to the best of your ability, so you can get a great in-depth in clarity and understanding of yourself. And thank you for watching.